Welcome back to Plugged Into Public Health. Today, I'm thrilled to have Dr. Tamara Marcus with us. Dr. Marcus is a climate scientist and activist known for her deep commitment to creating sustainable solutions. Her work has taken her many places, but now she's making a local impact in Cedar Rapids. As the co-founder of Empowered Solutions Collective, she works with nonprofits and local governments to develop accessible, equitable sustainability projects. Dr. Marcus is also passionate about connecting with communities to create social and environmental resilience. Today, we'll explore her journey, her unique blend of activism and science, and the actionable ways she's helping to address the climate crisis. Dr. Marcus, thank you for joining us. Now let's get plugged into public health. Thank you, Dr. Marcus. I really appreciate you being on the podcast with me this morning, and I'm excited to learn more about you and your business. To start off, my first question for you is what initially inspired you to become involved in climate activism? And then how has that journey kind of evolved over time to get you to where you are today?
It's so hard with these questions to know where is the starting point, right? Because it
Yeah.
feels like so many of these events just kind of build on one another.
Morning. It started like
Yeah,
when you were a child, when he lived in China and was 8 years old. There's such a broad spectrum of time.
definitely. Yeah. And I think, climate activism to me, I kind of separate from my climate research. I am a climate scientist. I've been studying climate change for almost 15 years now, working in the Swedish Arctic most recently for my
Wow.
dissertation research, and then previously in the Indian Himalaya and then the Australian outback as well. So I feel like just spending a lot of time studying, ecosystem change, impacts of climate change, and the impacts that that is having on people in the here and now. I think that's where a lot of my climate activism was like born, you know what I mean? Because
Mhm.
I felt like I had this tool and the skill set that had the potential to incite real change, but as is. And so there needed to be, kind of a translation of some of that information into action.
How did your climate research journey begin?
I feel like it really did start with my Gen Chem 1 class in undergrad, which maybe sounds weird, but I was pre-med and I was pre-med because I wanted to help people, right? When you're in high school and you think about what you want to do, there's four professions. So I was like, I want to be a doctor because I want
Yep.
to help people. And then I took Gen Chem 1 and it was terrible. I was so bad at it. And so, I kind of questioned myself after that, right? If I can't pass Gen Chem 1, and I did pass, but barely. If I can't pass Gen Chem 1, then can I actually finish med school?
It's gonna be
So
a
I
really long
spent
road.
a bit of an obstacle right out of the gate, but it was good. It was really good because it encouraged me to kind of reevaluate and explore other options. So I spent a
Right.
semester kind of doing just that. And at one point, I was a triple major. I was like, I'm going to do anthropology and French and poli sci. It was chaos. But then I did an internship with the Natural Resources Conservation Service. So it's like a US Department of Ag agency. And it was through that work that I realized, in part, again, kind of the power of like science research, STEM, solve like real problems again in the here and now, like things that we are dealing with and facing in this day. And then I went to the Bahamas and did some specific climate specific work looking at the impacts of humans on ecosystem change and climate change specifically. And it was really dope. I really enjoyed it. I really liked the field work. I really liked kind of being out in the system, getting to know it directly, not just through a computer or through books or whatever, but being there, doing research, doing that physical aspect of field work. And then the lab stuff was kind of okay too, but
Yeah.
you knew you had to do the lab stuff to do the other things, right? After that, I think I was just kind of an awakening of sorts of like, okay, cool. I want to help people, maybe not doctor,
Yep.
but this is doing it in a way that checks a lot of boxes and fills my cup in a lot of other ways too.
I think that experience is something that a lot of students can relate to. Like you said, there's like four careers. And I think a lot of students go into that. And then once they get
Mhm.
to there's actually a lot more paths than maybe we originally anticipated. Can you
Mhm.
also just describe your educational journey really quick so that our listeners know that part of it?
So let's see. I graduated from Kennedy High School, go Cougs in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And then I did, kind of what a lot of high school students try to do in Iowa. I did everything I could to leave the state. And so I went to the University of Minnesota and I ended up majoring in English and biochem. So I did end up taking more chemistry classes even
A lot
after
more
the
chem.
yep. Even after the Gen Chem debacle. Even took Gen Chem too. Yeah, did much better now. And then so I actually took a year off of between my sophomore and junior year of undergrad. That's when I started my climate research in India. And I say that because I feel like, when you think about career paths at any, people go to undergrad at any age, right? But especially for young folks, there is this very specific 4-year kind of model, right, that is heavily emphasized. I feel like still now, it's been a minute since I've been in high school,
Oh no,
but
yeah. Hmm.
that's still there. Okay, yeah, yeah. And so yeah, I took a year off and it was really smart for me because I wanted to study abroad. It was very expensive to study abroad. I found a fellowship that would support that, and that meant not getting college credit for that year. But I think in other ways, it was such a rewarding experience. So, did
Right.
that for a year, came back to Minnesota, finished my undergrad, took another year off before my PhD, went back to India as a Fulbright scholar, and then started my PhD. And that was a whole that was a very unique path, I would say.
You
And
share.
there was like a whole global pandemic during that, so that
Just
that
that.
colored a little bit.
Yep. Fair. That is totally fair. And where did you get your PhD from?
The
Through?
University of New Hampshire.
Okay. Did you move to New Hampshire?
I did spend a couple of years in New Hampshire. Yes,
Okay.
I did.
How does it compare to Iowa?
Let's see. So the things that I liked about it, like different than Iowa, were, the nature. I feel like there's obviously mountains and hiking,
Yeah,
and the water is a lot cleaner than our water here, so you can actually be in it safely.
that's a
Um,
perk.
yep. Gotta love being able to get into water. What I didn't love about it though, it was fairly conservative. And so it felt very polarized, I suppose is maybe the right word.
Yeah,
I think that was something that was harder for me. I'm from here, and it is predominantly white, and not that white is synonymous with conservative, but I guess in that case it kind of was. It was more the politics that kind of I found to be a little bit more challenging.
yeah,
Full disclosure, like I consider myself an independent, so it's not even like a two-party tension that I was
right.
picking up on. It was weird. It was very car heavy. It was very, very car heavy, which is not something even more so than Iowa and Cedar Rapids specifically, I would say. So
Yeah,
I found it to be very challenging.
interesting. Which leads me right to my next question, which is
Ooh.
about some of the challenges that you have faced over your career, especially early on in activism. What are some of those challenges and how have you overcome them or worked through them?
Yeah, yeah. I actually was thinking about this recently, and I feel like the one that is maybe not the most prevalent throughout my activism experience, but is definitely something that I think is really important to speak about is mental health challenges, right?
Mm,
And mental health support services and access to those services. We talk a lot about burnout, right, when we think about activism. And I think those to me are kind of synonymous or they're kind of connected, right? Like oftentimes activists are people who are working, on issues because they care so deeply to the point of overexhaustion emotionally, physically. They care that deeply about these causes. I've spent almost as long as I've been engaged, intensely with activist work. I've also been like navigating my mental health journey. It's very transformative to like now be in a place where I feel like I understand how to prioritize the physical needs of me, right? And how that then allows me to do this important work longer term in a more sustainable
yeah.
way.
I think that's a really good point That was an answer that I don't think I was expecting, and I think that's a great thing for people to remember as they, if that's a journey that they're going on themselves or considering as students.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to, like, I say this often, like, self-care is community care, right? Because if you are taking care of yourself and you have the things that you need, and I'm not saying being selfish, right? Make sure you're sleeping, you're getting nutritious food, you're drinking water, like these very basic things that we see all these memes about, right? How are you building that intentionally into your routine? How are you building checkpoints in, mental checkpoints, emotional checkpoints in to your day to day and to your routine to make sure that you can again sustain work because you need to sustain the self for that to be possible.
Yeah. I'm a yoga teacher, and one of my favorite sayings that I say a lot during class is you can't pour from an empty cup. So,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you're doing a lot of work that's in service to others, you have to fill yourself up first.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, we talked about your educational background, some of your early work in activism, but I would love it if you could tell the audience like what you do today.
Yeah, okay. Ooh, fun. So I'm one of the owners of Empowered Solutions Collective, which is a Cedar Rapids based sustainability consulting group, which we predominantly work mostly with nonprofits and local governments, helping them do mostly sustainability projects as well as social justice work too. So it's kind of, you can hear in like that like description, it's kind of broad, and that
Yeah.
is both a challenge and I think a beauty of my business partner and our work style. So her background, Sarah Blaze, she is more in the art space, community art space, especially using, kind of engagement, interactive art installation pieces to do social justice work. I'm more in the STEM research space. We kind of have our areas of focus or expertise, but then we coalesce around the shared interest in social justice and working towards creating more equitable spaces, creating more tolerant spaces, creating more accessible. I said equitable and then accessible spaces. I view it as kind of the culmination of my experience in local government, the nonprofit world. I started a nonprofit in 20 advocates for social justice. That work definitely has informed our vision for empowered solutions. And then just my work in academia, drawing from those skill sets as well. And then, of course, the expertise of my business partner, too.
When you say like creating more accessible, equitable spaces, are you talking
What does
about the
that mean?
culture?
Yeah, right. It's yes. It's yes and right because you're right. These are big words. They can be buzzwords even. And so I think for me and my business partner, I'll speak for myself because I don't want to speak for her. I think she shares a lot of these perspectives or experiences too. But let me just speak for myself since that's where I can actually speak from. I think there's a lot of interest in doing equity work, right? And especially when we think about the intersection of equity and sustainability, right? Because what we're really a lot of times talking about is noticing this disproportionate impact of climate change on vulnerable communities, right? So communities that have historically been marginalized, communities that include people with disabilities, immigrant and refugee communities, there are many different types of vulnerable communities, but what they share often is, again, feeling this disproportionate impact of the effects of climate change. And an example I use to contextualize that is the derecho, right? So that was something that most people in this area and the corridor in eastern Iowa have a story or know someone or have their own story that impacted all of our community, even people who weren't directly physically impacted by that, right? Because again, this social network that we have in the corridor. But that impact was not felt the same across that area, right? So you had some people who, owned a home, had damage to their home, but had insurance to fix it. Maybe it took a long time for that repair to happen, maybe more than a year or two, right? But still that level of like insurance, that level of assurance, right, is very different than, some of the apartment complexes that were completely destroyed. And
Yeah.
maybe people didn't have renter's insurance because that's not something that people always have, right? It's not required for you to have that the same way it is for home insurance, right? So then to lose like that same event, that shared disaster event, right, feels differently. That impact is different based off of a variety of factors, some of which you have control over, some of which you don't.
Yeah.
So you ask like, what equity work look like? What does accessibility work like in this space? Well, you you first have to lay that foundation of knowing that again, when you're doing this work, it is going to look different depending on the organization and entity that you're working with because those needs are going to be different.
Right.
That's what I think is so powerful and valuable about the model that Sarah and I have here, is because we live in these communities. We have relationships here, right? We've worked with these individuals, these organizations for years at this point. And we also then have these skill sets that are potentially very valuable to some of the solutions to the problems that we're experiencing again in the here and now, right? Things like grant writing. There's an incredible amount of funding through federal legislation such as the Inflation Reduction Act, right? That is billions of dollars for these types of projects. It includes healthcare, it includes renewable energy investments, right? It is huge. And there are competitive projects, organizations in these communities in the corridor. But if you are capacity limited in some way, for example, maybe you only have a staff of two and you don't have time to write a grant. Maybe you're a new nonprofit leader and you don't have the experience in writing a grant, right? We do more than grant writing, right? But that's an example of like, here's an opportunity with this federal funding. Here's a problem that we're experiencing in our community. How do we match this with local partners and help make these projects not only possible, but do it from a foundation of realizing that, again, each organization's needs, each individual's needs are going to be dependent because their experience with the impacts of climate change is different.
It's really a tailored service and solution that you're providing.
Yeah, that's our hope.
What do you think sets Empowered Solutions Collective apart from like other consulting services that might do something similar?
Just our network and our track record of working in this community is something that I think is unique. I think that there's a lot of good entities doing good work, and I just don't think that we're at saturation at this point. I think that's evident based off of, yeah, the types of projects that we've been able to work on over just a short time. We've really just started doing business this year. It's exciting to see the diversity of these types of projects happening across very different organizations, all the way to city county governments, all the way to small nonprofits that predominantly serve BIPOC individuals.
Yeah.
And so then I think too, one thing Sarah and I really value in our mission, again, is ensuring that individuals that have historically not been a part of this work, not had access to resources to do this work, it's very important to our mission for us to prioritize those individuals, those organizations, because they deserve it.
Do you serve mostly clients in the Iowa area or is it nationwide?
It's just Iowa for now, but who knows?
Yeah, girl can dream, right? How does your organization then ensure that sustainability initiatives that you create are both community informed and inclusive?
Sarah and I are big talkers, big conversationalists. Our process is one where we solicit feedback on a regular basis. There's one fairly exciting project that we have coming, which I can't say, I wish I could say more about it, but more to come soon. And it's essentially funding to do a social justice project in the state of Iowa. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of flexibility in our ability to design what that project looks like, which then you could just say, here's all of the ideas that I've been like piling up, and now I finally have the funding to execute them. That's one approach. So, what we do using this as an example of our process is think about, okay, what other local organizations is it important for us to talk with? Okay,
Mhm.
what are themes like that we think are going to be potentially relevant to this type of work locally based off of our shared experience? Okay, where can we get in front of students or young people to get feedback on some of these ideas and hear what direction they want to go for funding to work towards a social justice issue? The reason we start there, right? The reason we start with soliciting information and feedback from the individuals that we're hoping to impact is so then we're better ensuring that as we're creating something, we're doing it with the knowledge that this is actually going to it's actually a need of the target community, as opposed to creating something and then saying, here, target community, use this and then the target community says, we didn't ask for this. It's so common in so many of our systems in government and academia, for this like process to unfold, where it's creating the tool before you've asked people if they even want to use it. Using this as an example, our process is more stepping back, thinking about, okay, where do we want to go? Where do you as an organization, you know what I mean, whatever that your audience is, where do you want to go, and then how can we help break down the pieces and provide the structure to get you there? Does that make sense?
Oh, that totally makes sense. And that's something that I think I've said about academia before too, is that sometimes I think we're answering questions no one wants necessarily, or no one needs the answer. You followed the funding or what you think will
Mm-hmm.
bring in money. And other times, I just think that a lot of times we don't do it with the end goal in mind. Sometimes I think
Right.
we should work backwards.
Absolutely, absolutely.
What types of projects do you find most impactful that you've been able to work on, or I don't know, most exciting? And then how do you approach project development with sustainability and equity in mind?
The problems that I love to work on are ones that I feel like are solving a problem, because I feel like there's sustainability and resiliency encompass so much that it's really hard not to find a connection to like an existing problem and a solution that's available through like a sustainability or resiliency framework, process, whatever.
Yeah.
Something that we have worked on extensively, or I guess I've worked on extensively a little bit before Empowered Solutions at my former role as the Lynn County Sustainability Director, and now with Empowered Solutions are resilience hubs. Using derecho or using the tornado in Iowa City as well, right? Like these disruptive events, and they don't have to not necessarily be natural disasters, but any disruptive event. After we go through that, it's like very apparent what we can work on ahead of the next
Yep.
disaster, right? Unfortunately, we're living in a time where it's not a matter of if we're going to have another disaster. I think all at this point are expecting it, which we should.
Yeah.
That's one of the impacts of climate change, is that natural disasters are more extreme, right? With greater intensity. And again, the derecho was one of the most costly thunderstorms in US
Wow.
history. Thinking about how we're spending this time before the next disaster to prepare for it is really important. And not to like, you know, it doesn't have to be this like doomsday prepping where like storing a bunch of canned goods in our basements kind of vibe. Like, no, thinking about derecho and the tornado, the first line of response after those events is often your neighbors, right? The people around you. So, how do you build social resiliency? How do you build social networks? So then, when something like that happens and emergency services can't get to you for whatever period of time, you have a way to stay safe, right? And you have a way to support one another as a community, right? That's what I mean, where it's like, this is a problem that most of us think about at least once a month, right? Is our emergency prepared, especially during the summers? Are we prepared for a disruptive event, right? And so being able to use sustainability tools, skill like frameworks, right, to then apply that to something that most of us are thinking about on a regular basis, right? That is solving a problem, that is addressing a struggle, a challenge in the day to day. But then even breaking it down further, right? Like food access, there's an immense amount of opportunity to use sustainability initiatives to address food deserts, which unfortunately in Cedar Rapids and Lynn County, we have more of because of the closure of Hy-Vee on First Ave, right? That is a systemic problem that through systemic solutions is able to actually be addressed, but you have to want to do it. And
Yeah, I
I
was just
think,
gonna say you have to want to do it.
right, I don't want to jump around too much. One of the questions you'd asked was about the role of businesses in this work.
Yeah.
I think this is a good segue because it's really hard to turn the ships of government and academia. and research institutions, right? It's
Yeah.
really hard to do that, and it's worth spending time and effort to do so. That being said, businesses are able, from at least my very brief experience personally and from my observations from a longer period of time, they're able to move more swiftly. That's part of why I wanted to start Empowered Solutions Collective, was to be able to move urgently. And that doesn't mean sloppy, right? That doesn't mean building a bunch of EV charging stations, right? I firmly believe that most of what our challenges, both climate wise, but also socially wise, it's not solved by honestly more data at this point. It's not solved by more infrastructure development. It's solved by repairing relationships,
Yeah.
which is hard work to do. And it doesn't happen fast, but you can take urgent action to do that, right? To repair those relationships. And I know this is where I get all hippie and all that, but I firmly believe that as a person who has spent hours looking at data, has written hundreds of, well, maybe 100 and some, close to 200 pages of my, whatever, a lot of pages of my dissertation, right? I've looked at a lot of data, I've talked to a lot of climate scientists, and this is a personal opinion. I'm sure other people will have their own and maybe disagree with mine, but we've known about climate change since the 60s. We've been publishing papers about it at least since the 60s. And so, do we feel like we've gotten further, at least as far as we would expect from knowing about it for so long? I think most people would say no, right? And that's not like, again, I'm not trying to like crap on all of the progress, because I do think there has been some, but I really don't know how much more data we need to move the needle if our neighbors don't believe in climate change.
Right. Which kind
So
of,
sorry, thanks for my ramble, or the space to
no.
ramble.
If I follow up to that is then how do you talk to people who maybe don't think that the climate is changing? That's kind of what I was thinking as you were finishing that up.
For where we are now, I think it might not matter. I think that might not be the most important thing for us to like be in consensus about now. And that might be an unpopular opinion, but here's why I say it. Unfortunately, when you talk about climate change, it is very politicized, it is very polarized. And as soon as you say climate change, for someone who, is considers themselves a climate denier, what they're going to turn off, right? And so it depends on what your objective is, sure, right? But assuming your objective is to incite some behavior change, some increased awareness or education, then I think pick something else that you can agree on that is leading in the same direction, right? So I think about energy efficiency, for example. It's not very sexy, right? It's not an EV charging station or a Tesla or battery storage, but it's important and it saves people money. And would I like us to be further along than having to like give that as like the reason to act? Yes, personally, I would like that. But also realistically, this is
Yeah.
where we are, and it's not going to change unless we're all, I think, those of us who want this type of work to happen, unless we're all doing that and helping people within our circle and network, along that path, and being willing to reevaluate our own opinions about these policies too, and understand that we don't know it all either, right? That needs to happen, right? So that's when you ask the question, what if someone doesn't believe in climate change? I still think we can make progress, shared progress along paths that we both agree on, but then again, it's probably not going to look like this person is going to buy a Tesla or whatever other EV after this one conversation, because they're just not. They're just not.
You have to meet people where they're at in order to move forward.
And have some humility too. Like I've had a lot of conversations with folks that I think, again, good intentioned, but are not willing to consider that they might not know everything about that topic either, and I think that it's the same, you get that on both sides of every issue. And that energy is not very conducive for consensus building, which is what I think is required for real behavior change and real, collective impact.
How would you describe the current state of like climate activism, and what progress do you think has been made in the recent years, and what areas do you foresee needing some urgent attention going forward?
So here's the thing, I don't have social media, so
Hmm.
sure that there are things that I'm not aware of that are happening. So if anyone's listening to this and they're like, I can't believe she shouldn't say this, like, so I'll speak locally. What I've been encouraged by is seeing a lot of the not usual organizations, individuals having conversations about climate action, sustainability, resiliency, and seeing some like I think exciting partnerships both at like in at the government level, but then also at a local level, again on doing like shared work towards shared climate action work. So I think that's it, to me it speaks to this education is working at some level. People are feeling like they understand the issue a little bit more and can take some and engage in the topic, I guess, a little bit more, which I think is a win. I think the areas where we could do a little bit more, I think government can be a tool for activism. I think you can have an activist government, and I think locally there's a lot more we could be doing within our local governments. And there are really good examples in the corridor to point to. So I don't mean to
Yeah.
say that that's not happening at all, but I think there's so much power like at the end of the day, if we want there to be a real impact in our emission reduction, we have to take action at a higher level, which includes government and
Mhm.
industry.
You have to have the policy to support that sustained or prolonged change and to
Yep.
help incentivize it
Yep.
for businesses. Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's tough work to do. I don't want to just say that, like, yeah, just do that. And, it's an easy thing to do. It's not like there's so many jobs wrapped up into the fossil fuel industry. Again, it reminds me of like the consensus building, the relationship building, right? It takes time to do this work, which is why we need to be doing the work urgently, right? Not like we expect it to be quick, but we are consistently investing in these solutions. That's what I think we need to see more of.
Yeah. Policy change absolutely takes time. Like you mentioned earlier, the government works slow. It can be discouraging, I'm sure, to want to embark on some of these things, knowing that the solution may not come for years and years. But if we don't take action now, the solution will be even farther down the road. So, as we wrap this up, I have one final question, and that is, what is the most important message that you hope our listeners take away from the conversation today about climate change and activism that we've covered?
Okay, two things. I have two things. First one, take care of yourself. Just to like reinforce that message. Again, doesn't mean to be selfish, but just don't forget that you also, need things. And those things are okay for you to be needing. And giving yourself those things helps you give other people the things that they may need. So that's message number one. And then I guess the second one would be stay encouraged about this work because it's really hard. And like no one has figured it out, myself included. And I think the solution lies within it's a collective solution, right? So you can't as an individual figure it out or do it all. Just do your best. Stay encouraged with the work, find good people. Again, see message one, take care of yourself. And yeah, just find the ways that you can make a difference, which could some days just be, resting. Stay encouraged.
I love it. Well, I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to chat with us. I hope our listeners have found something to take away from this and were encouraged in this conversation. Otherwise, thank you so much.
Thank you, Lauren. It was super fun.
Thank you so much, Dr. Marcus, for sharing your wisdom and dedication. It was inspiring to see how you're not only driving change and sustainability, but also building community resilience through your work at Empowered Solutions Collective. Your message, take care of yourself and stay encouraged, resonated with me and hopefully our listeners as well. For our listeners, if this conversation has sparked something in you, consider how you can contribute in sustainability within your own community, big or small. Thanks for tuning into the podcast. Let's stay plugged into public health. This episode was hosted and written by Lauren Lavin and edited and produced by Lauren Lavin. You can learn more about the University of Iowa College of Public Health on Facebook. Our podcast is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and SoundCloud. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to help support the podcast, please share it with your colleagues, friends, or anyone interested in public health, and subscribe on your local podcast channel. Have a suggestion for our team? You can reach us at cph-gradambassador@uiowa.edu. This episode is brought to you by the University of Iowa College of Public Health. Until next week, stay healthy, stay curious, and take care.